Right. Hello and welcome everyone to this golden hour conducted by YORStory. We've got a very special guest today. We've got Jackie Norton, expert brand consultant. She's had over 20 years experience working with major brands such as Marks and Spencer's, Topshop, Topman, Burton's, and more recently the Goodwood Estate. Jackie's been involved with them for over 12 years, working with Lord March very closely, a very successful brand, and many more other smaller brands, and is an entrepreneur in her own right, running several businesses and launching them and getting them off the ground. So she'll understand everything we need to know as SMEs. And she's also busy. She's a strong person who pens books, articles, etc. And she's working on some of those. Anyway, so Jackie tonight is going to be talking to us about how to write and understand your brand and the story that is your brand. So over to you, Jackie, for the next 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll take questions. We'll keep people on mute. I do know there will be some interaction, and Jackie will tell me when everybody is unmuted and can participate, talk, and engage. So over to Jackie. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Beverly. That was a bit of a send up there. I have been around a long time, it is true. My background started in high street retail in the fashion business back in the end of the 80s and the 90s, when it's difficult to imagine how successful the high street was then. It was just before, of course, the launch of online and the World Wide Web, etc. in 2000. So at that time, brands like Marks and Spencer's, Topshop, Burton Group, all those businesses, Next had just launched, and all that stuff was happening, and it was very hot. So it was a great place to be, and it was a great place to learn about brands. Now, when I actually started in the retail business, they weren't called brands, they were called shops. So Topshop was just a chain of shops, and Debenhams was a department store. And it's only really, I suppose, as we headed towards the end of the 90s, that everything became a brand, everything, and now everything's a brand. We're all brands, everything's a brand. So I sort of lived through the evolution of everything becoming, up until that time, it was really only FM, fast moving consumer goods like Fairy Liquid and Omo and Daz and all these sorts of things that were thought of as brands. But now everything and everyone is a brand. So I spent 20 years in high street retail. I ended up, I say sadly, actually at the time it was great, as the brand director for Topman. So I was on the board of Arcadia, which sadly, to my great dismay, has obviously gone into administration at the hands of our Sir Philip Green, which we won't really comment upon at this moment. But very sad times, because that was a great business with very strong, powerful brands. And they were strong and powerful brands because their customers loved them, which is what brands are all about. I have, as we all do, a story, and my story is one, I suppose, of really sort of resilience and enforced change, because at one point in my life, in about 2001, my husband was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and I had to give up my role as a brand director and reinvent myself as a consultant, and tout around to develop some business. And it was really not by any plan, but I just realized that I had all this experience and knowledge from my time dealing with these fashion brands that I could then develop in a consultancy mode to help particularly fledgling businesses and smaller brands in developing their growth strategies and ways of communicating. So I then spent 12, 15 years running my own brand consultancy, working with some businesses you might have heard of. They tend to be mostly fashion, beauty, clothing, those sorts of consumer projects, menswear, children's wear. I've pretty much worked across everything, even touched on food at some point as well. And during that time, I worked with a fabulous brand innovation agency for 3 years called What If, which is where I learned my craft. And I did such projects as help the Goodwood Estate reinvent itself. I worked with the owner of Pure Collection Cashmere brand, develop their brand away from V-neck jumpers and into the fashion arena, things like that. So that is my experience. Latterly, I've invested in some of my own businesses. During that time, I met Beverly about 6 or 7 years ago, and we found that we had lots in common in terms of our approach to life and the world. So that's how I've come to be sitting here in front of you this evening to talk about brands. So that's a little bit about me. I hate the word passionate, but it is a particular interest of mine, brands, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about brands. A lot of people think the brand is the font, the color, the name, but that's just the manifestation of a brand. And I'm not sure whether I might be talking to the converted here. So some of you might have had brand experience, some not. But the whole point about a brand is that it connects emotionally with the consumer, the target audience, the customer, whatever you like to call them. So it's very important. The more powerful a brand, and we talk about power brands sometimes, which are amazingly strong, like a Nike, for example, would be thought of as being a power brand, because they have a tremendous pull and a tremendous resonance with their consumer. And what they do is they meet a need that that consumer or customer or that audience has. So a brand very much is all about the heart and really hitting the heart with the sorts of messages that the consumers are looking to respond to. So I'm sure some of you guys, and I would just ask you to think about for a moment, some of the brands that you actually love. I mean, they don't have to be famous brands. There might just be a little tiny brand that you've come across that you think, gosh, that does that so well. In fact, some of the most powerful and best brands are what we call niche, and they just do one thing really, really, really well. I'm sorry, there's just fireworks going off. Can you hear fireworks? There's no fireworks going off. I don't know what's going on. Sorry about that. Is there a special thing happening today? It's not Valentine's Day, is it, or something?
No.
Oh, very strange. Well, it sounds like there's more than 3 people next door doing fireworks here. That can't be right. Yes, so the more niche your offer, the more specific and targeted it is, then the more powerful your brand will be. So have a little think about, because we come back to this, have a little think about some of your favorite brands and the brands that you love that really deliver on their promise. So obviously we're here because what unites us all really in this aspect is storytelling. And the thing about brands is that behind every brand is a story. And the more powerful and relevant that story is, the more powerful and strong the brand is. And over the course of time, I've met some people, and sometimes I'll come across a business and they've actually got a very strong business. They've got a product the customer loves, but they haven't actually got a brand. And I said, well, then we have to sort of invent a story. So I asked them to tell me about how they came to be making this product, how they came to be doing what they're doing. And they don't actually realize that there is a story. And so that is what makes it relevant really for you guys in terms of storytelling, is that behind every story, every brand is a great story. And if I use a brand like, for example, Levi's. Now, if I sent you out today and said, hey guys, let's all have a little brainstorm session and let's think about a great name for jeans, we would not come up with the word Levi's. We wouldn't come up with that word. But the word Levi's, does anybody know the story of, you might know the story of Levi's. Levi's, of course, has its roots back in the days when men in America had to wear strong cotton trousers because the work they did, they needed protection, and they invented the product denim, and this became made into dungarees, and it was very much a working man's uniform. And out of that, I mean, I'm really tracing that down now, but that's how they came to make a very robust fabric, which was denim, which then created and is the father of the jeans market as it is today. But it came out of a requirement to make a fabric that was good in the workplace, really. And the guy who invented it, of course, was called Mr. Levi. And that's how we have Levi's today. But if you think of that origination of that brand story, and how that brand story has built and been used over the years in the imagery and the marketing and the communications that Levi's, the business, has done. But it still keeps true to its core as very much a kind of working, robust product that is pretty timeless, really. So a brand, behind every successful brand is a story. And behind each story, as you think about the story, there then evolves a proposition. And that is the core of what a brand is. A brand is a proposition. Now, that might not mean anything to you. So I've just got a couple of things here which might help understand what a proposition is. So if you think about, for example, I'm going to show you something here. I'm going to show you this. Now, this might not mean anything to some of our people from not from the UK, but this is the John Lewis Partnership, and they always used to say, never knowingly undersold. Now, this is a very strong brand in the UK. It's all about being reassuring, being trustworthy, being steadfast, and being full of value. And the story behind the John Lewis Partnership is a story rooted in the ethical base of the partnership model of business, which is that it's a business that runs for the good of its employees and its staff, and therefore that resonates very powerfully and strongly with a very family-based, conservative target audience who want to deal with a business they can trust, that they know will always deliver. I don't mean just deliver in a van, but I mean deliver on what they're promising you. And that is the evolution. And that is, you might say, I mean, I don't know what the proposition of John Lewis is, but it's pretty much around being reassured and being trusted. So that is what we say is a proposition. Now, I've got something here which might not mean something to everybody. I can find it here. But I've got something that I think might define a brand which you may or may not be familiar with, perhaps not the guys, but the wording on here is vintage kitsch. Now, what brand do you think that might be? Anybody got any ideas? Vintage kitsch.
Is that like Kathy Kidston?
That is Kath Kidston,
is
right?
It?
Yes, that is Kath
Really?
Kidston. So if I was Kath Kidston, a little bit below your mouth. Is that better? Yeah. So vintage kitsch. So that really, if you think about it, absolutely sums up Kath Kidston. And for those of you who don't know Kath Kidston, it's a brand in the vein of kind of Laura Ashley and Home Goods that is very much rooted in nostalgic prints from the 50s, when being a housewife was what every woman did, and everything was floral and fabulous and based on fabrics. So everything that happens in Kath Kidston, right, what a proposition does, it means that you've got a strong basis upon which everything you do in your business connects. So, for example, if I came up with a lovely taupe leather handbag and presented it to Kath Kidston to say, I think I really should have this lovely, beautiful, slimline taupe leather handbag in the range, it would be rejected because it wasn't vintage kitsch, right? So vintage kitsch and that proposition helps keep the things in your business that you should have in your business and keep in your business. And it helps you equally to say no to things that shouldn't be in your business. Now, I'm referring here to high street brands and brands that might be familiar to you, but I just I tried to come up with some other ideas, and I thought of, say, for example, if you were an author and your consumers liked the books that you wrote, and they were very much what you'd call, you might think, I write about fireside romances. So my customer, my target audience likes to snuggle up with my books, be all cozy and lose themselves in the romantic story that I'm going to tell them. So that would then define perhaps your genre and how you write. And if you start to go off that and start getting into detective fiction, well, then obviously your customer might lose the will to buy your books anymore. So I'm just using very simple examples to demonstrate the value and the power of your proposition. So whether you're an author, a writer, or a business person, I think it's really, I mean, you probably find this yourselves, particularly for those SMEs perhaps, when people say to you, oh, so what do you do? And you go, oh, well, what I do is I've got this, and I, you know, blah, blah, blah. Well, a proposition will help you really do the elevator pitch. So it's very useful in terms of just communicating simply about what you're in the business of, which I'm pretty good at doing this for other people, absolutely hopeless at doing it for myself, right? So if anybody asks me what I do, you know, this and that, you know, bit of this, bit of that. But it's a really good exercise to try and define and distill what your proposition is. What are you in the business of? What are you trying to achieve? So if we take it very simply, and I'm sure some of you might have heard of Tony Robbins. Anybody heard of Tony Robbins? Nod if you've heard of Tony Robbins. So he's a very famous coach. Here, the story of Tony Robbins is he started very simply as a smoking coach. That is to say, he helped people stop smoking. And so his proposition might have been something like this: stop smoking in 21 days. His target audience, very clearly, people who want to stop smoking. And he promises to do that in 21 days. Very simple, not 22 days, 21 days. So he will stop you smoking in 21 days. Very clear. Everything he does should be to achieve that. And his customers have a reasonable expectation that that is what he is going to deliver. I made another one up here, for example. So that's very much about a very clear message. I thought about one here for perhaps a dating coach. So I'm thinking about being a dating coach and thinking how a dating coach, because there's lots of people out there, dating coaches. I was amazed to find out. Not that I have ever used one, maybe I should, but anyway. And they all struggle to differentiate themselves and, you know, get across what they're trying to help people do. So I just made this up. So if I was working with a dating coach, for example, I might say, I might come up with a proposition to say, I'm treating, what am I doing? I'm treating the heart of the matter. So that's what I'm saying. I'm going to work with you on how your heart needs to be, how your heart needs to be, what you want in your heart in order to attract the right people, and in order for you to perhaps love yourself a bit more so that you can attract people to you. And I'm going to work with you as a dating coach to get to the heart of the problem so that you can attract the right people and have more successful relationships, for example. So that might be a proposition for a dating coach. And they would, you know, maybe work around their communications to write that. So I'll stop there for just a moment and just to see if that makes any sense or resonates with you guys at all in terms of clarifying what a brand is and helping you to understand what a proposition is, and whether it makes you think a little bit about what you're in the business of and how you communicate what you do. And I've worked in many settings with all sorts of different people. And actually, it's sort of relevant to everybody, you know, whether you're a politician, work in the local council, a doctor, you know, any kind of, you can align this with any kind of profession or activity or job to say, what are you in the business of? So the next thing after that, that's very important, is to think about, you know, you're figured out what you're in the business of, what your proposition is. You then need to think about, well, who is my customer? Who are my target audience? And what are their needs? What do they need from me? Specifically, what is perhaps their unmet need? So people are only looking around for things that they need. They're not looking around for things that they've already got. So if you've got a husband and you're very happily married, you're not really in need of a dating coach. So obviously that, well, you know, hopefully not, they're not going to be in your target audience. But if you've got a real problem with your health and you need to stop smoking, then you are going to be looking for somebody to help you achieve that. So you're thinking about, what are the needs of my customers, my audience? And sometimes in order to help with that, it's really useful to listen to your customers or to get some insights. You've probably heard that word, consumer insight is a very, very powerful thing to help you understand what your audience is looking for and what's going to make them, you know, because it's very noisy out there, what's going to make them sit up and pay attention to you. So, for example, there might be somebody out there in terms of stopping smoking who says, I can help you stop smoking in 2 months. We think, well, that's no good. I want to stop smoking in 3 weeks. So that's not going to, you know, the insight there would be that I want to stop smoking quickly. So that would be an insight that would help you arrange what you're doing for your audience. So you might ask yourself, well, how do I get customer insights? And obviously the traditional way that big brands do it is they do consumer groups, they get feedback, and there are many, many ways these days of getting insights. And sometimes it's as simple as just chatting, even when you've got, say if you're a new business or you've got a new idea, just chatting to friends, just chatting to, I mean, I've chatted rather randomly to people actually, and you just gain so much just from a quick, brief conversation, by showing them your product, by asking them, I mean, it might not always be something direct, you might asking them how they feel about home fragrances, for example. If you want to launch home fragrances, what do they use in their home? Do they use air wick? Do they prefer to have natural fragrances? That sort of thing. And you just find, if you put your mind to it, there's actually a lot of information out there amongst friends, friends of friends, colleagues, even going online. You can just search so much stuff to get these very, very valuable nuggets of information, which will give you a little bit of insight into what your potential consumer or target audience is thinking and what they're out there looking for and what makes a difference. There's absolutely loads of information out there. It's quite fascinating. So having a proposition, getting some insights, that starts to build your brand story. So then one of the things, well, in order to really think about your brand story, and again, this depends on whether you perhaps got a business or whether you're a solopreneur in terms of maybe as a writer or a coach or somebody who's just selling themselves. You know, that's about your story. If you've got a product, it's about the story of how, a little bit about you perhaps, and maybe how you came to present this product to market. And the thing about consumer product businesses, people absolutely love the story of the business because it just brings people that little bit closer. So in terms of this emotional connection with the consumer and the audience, they absolutely love to hear the story. So everybody loves to hear the story about Kath Kidston. I don't know if anybody knows the story of Kath Kidston. It's again a very simple story. There she was at her mother's old house. I think she found a tea towel that she had when she was a child. She made it into an ironing board cover. Everybody loved it. Then she started making lots of ironing board covers and selling them in a market. The next thing, she was a multimillionaire. You know, that's sort of simple. But everybody loves that story. How did she come to make these little prints? You know, the story of Laura Ashley, a similar story. I had the privilege actually in my time running my own consultancy. What I absolutely loved was, because I worked in as a consultant in corporate finance businesses raise money for businesses. I got to meet very, very many high street brands and entrepreneurial led brands. And I loved hearing the story, because as soon as we met these business owners, we'd always say to them, how did you get into doing this? And it was always, I mean, the guy who set up the cashmere business, he didn't set up the cashmere business because he was passionate about cashmere V-neck jumpers. He had a friend who had a load of cashmere yarn in his garage and didn't know what to do with it, you know? So you know, that's how he got into the cashmere business. So we then had to invent a story that wasn't about having a load of cashmere left in his garage, was something else, you know, about goats in China and things. And similarly, the best story I ever had was a business called Wiggle, which you may have come across, which sells all sorts of sports kit these days, but it started out selling parts for bikes. And it actually started out in 1999 when the internet started. So this bloke, who was a bit of a ducker and diver, he thought he'd set up a website because he'd heard this was the latest thing. And he just decided randomly to call it Wiggle. And he hadn't got anything to sell. And he came across this product, which was a condom in a gold 50 pence piece. So he bought all these condoms in a gold 50p piece and advertised them in the back of the Evening Standard, I think it was. And he sold loads of them, and he thought, this is jolly good, you know. And he ran out of those. So then he didn't have anything else to sell. And it was just coming up to the millennium, and there was going to be an eclipse. So then he got lots of those periscope things, and he sold some of them. And he thought, well, this is marvelous. I'm loving this. So then he ran out of periscopes, and obviously you didn't need one after the eclipse. So he then found that he inadvertently bought a bunch of property, and there was a bike shop in there. And in the back in the stockroom was a load of bicycle parts. So he put them up on the website and started selling pedals and brakes and things. And that was the birth of Wiggle. It made him a multi-millionaire. That business is now valued at over £200 million, and it's a global business, and he's got a yacht and houses around the world. But you know, it was just a very random start, and it was what a great story, you know. So and these are the things that people find absolutely fascinating. And you find, particularly I found with Wiggle, I worked on it when it was only turning over 12 million, that you had a very passionate consumer in the bicycle community who absolutely loved Wiggle. And what we found when we did research is they literally, in their lunch hours, they ordered a bicycle part or something every week. And it was their little treat for themselves. Like, I think women perhaps might order lipsticks from Beauty Pie or whatever these days. But, you know, it was their little treat. And when you got to talk to the wives, and I had some friends who had, you know, bicycling husbands, it was, oh yes, we get a Wiggle parcel every week. And you then get your insight into your consumer. Oh, I've got this guy now. So he works in business. He absolutely loves biking at the weekend. He likes to buy all his bits and pieces to make, you know, because, I mean, I might be speaking incorrectly, boys who are listening in, but my experience is when men are passionate about something, you know, their car or their bike or their skiing, they like to have all the right kit. So they then spend a lot of time and effort with the right kit. So that's a very good, useful insight when you're servicing, for example, a male brand in sportswear, you know, because you've got to be expert and do the right thing. So I've slightly gone off on a bit of a tangent now, I do appreciate, but that's what storytelling is about. So those are some of the stories, and they just go on and on and on. So I have been very privileged over the years to hear so many stories about many high street brands, how they got started, and how, you know, very often with businesses and brands, they start in one place with an idea and they end up somewhere completely different because the original idea was flawed, the customers wanted something else, and then the owner or founder responded by evolving their proposition, if that makes sense to you. So I'm going to stop there for a moment and just see if there's any questions so far, Beverly, or anything wants clarification at all on propositions and insights on brands.
Mute people because you know, they can ask questions.
Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask me at this stage?
I would like, Jackie, I would really like to ask you that. That was really, really fascinating. And one of the things what you're saying about these propositions, especially for people maybe trying to either write books or do podcasts or do anything in media, is how important, how long do you think their kind of proposition should be? Should they be able to say what they're doing in one sentence?
Yeah, well, here's the thing about a proposition as well. I mean, I did show you the John Lewis one, which actually the proposition, I'm saying that's the proposition. It also happens to be the tagline, but I should be clear here. Your proposition doesn't have to be something that becomes your tagline. Your proposition can just be something that you own. It might translate into a slightly different tagline. So I can't think of an example to hand, but again, just to be clear on brands, you know, just like the brand isn't necessarily the font of the sign over the shop, the proposition isn't necessarily the tagline. So if I take the example of Topshop and Topman, their proposition was 16 and now. That proposition informed everything they did, the model, the fashion, how fast it got to market, but you never saw that written anywhere. It just was the proposition within the business to make sure, and of course you've all heard the expression on brand, so propositions are used to keep everything on brand. They might not necessarily be shared with the public, they might be translated in a different way for the public, but they keep everything particularly as you get a bigger company, and you've got to get the culture embedded. And that was something we had to do at Goodwood. So we came up with this proposition at Goodwood. I don't know if anybody knows Goodwood, but Goodwood have horse racing. They have an airport, a little, for a small airport. They have motor racing, which is hugely popular. They have a hotel. They have wedding venues. They have a house. They have 13 different brands within the Goodwood estate. And we had to come up with a proposition that covered everything. And what we came up with was spoil yourself in unspoilt Goodwood. Everything we do is informed by a sheer love of life, is full of daring do, and is fueled by an obsession for perfection. So that was the proposition, and that was what underpinned the proposition. And that was fundamentally informed by Lord March, now the Duke of Richmond, because he had an obsession for perfection. He was a photographer. He worked with Stanley Kubrick, and he saw everything through a lens, and everything had to be perfect. So you ended up with a brand and a business, whether it's horse racing, motor racing, the hotel, the cream tea you had in the afternoon, the way that the planes were lined up at the airport, anything that happened at Goodwood was always perfect. So that's how, and his story, I mean, luckily, he had a story about his family, which was all the people in his family. So his grandfather raced motor cars, another person loved planes, somebody else played golf, somebody else loved horse racing and built the horse racing thing. So the whole story of Goodwood comes from family sporting passions. So then you have a brand which actually resonates globally around the world. If you say Goodwood to a motor car enthusiast, they usually know what you're talking about straight away, and they have an immediate idea of what it stands for.
It seems to me that kind of thing, it would, for writers specifically, would be really important in terms of having a sentence of this is what my book is, because I think writers can get lost. It's what you're saying about, you start off writing a romance novel and then you've got 2 dead bodies, but romance novels don't have dead bodies. You kind of, there are rules, or even if what you're saying is, I am trying to be Jane Austen meets Elmore Leonard, I need to keep that in my head.
Yeah. No, but that's great. And in fact, in the world of brands, we do that a lot. And people go, so what's this new idea you've got? Then it's say, oh, well, it's Deliveroo meets Harrods. Oh, so it's like luxury products on the back of a motorbike, say, for example. So people often blend brands, or blend, it's Hercule Poirot on speed, or whatever. Or Hercule Poirot does dating, something like that. So it's often a good way. And if you said, oh, Hercule Poirot does dating, you think, I definitely have a view of that. Or Miss, Miss Marple, joins a sex club, something like that. So
can you please write that book, Jackie? I now want book Miss Marple.
No, but sometimes when you're talking about brands, it's quite good to have that juxtaposition. And I've worked with many brand businesses, because what you want to, I can't remember which one it was actually. There's been quite a few over the years, but what you take is the essence. I mean, if you take Pizza Express, what they did at Pizza Express, they looked at the pizza businesses. I mean, we're talking the 80s now. They were the first successful pizza business, and they looked at everything else that pizza business they were doing, and they improved every single aspect of the pizza crust, the topping, the box the service in the thing, the way the restaurant, the thing was written. So they took something and they made it better, and they just improved it 100%. Because as you probably heard it said, there's no such thing as a new idea. But very often, in terms of the elevator pitch, it's very useful to identify things that people are already familiar with, to get people to get your idea. So I'm just trying to think of some off the top of my head, but over the years we've had many brands that say, well, so what you've taken is you've taken the expertise of one thing, and the fabulousness of one thing, and the delivery method of something else, and you put those two together, which you could say, like, Net-a-Porter is like taking Gucci on Prime, Gucci and Amazon together gives you Net-a-Porter. So it's great, fabulous fashion delivered next day, for example. Then people go, oh yeah, got that, yeah. So yes, so I think for authors, actually what we know is, says she jabbering on, is it's much easier to describe something in many sentences than it is to write it in one sentence. It's actually quite a process and a skill to actually distill down. So we came up with enjoy yourself in unspoilt Goodwood. That was 16 days work, 10 focus group, and about £75,000 to come up with that sentence. And I'm not suggesting that you have to do that, but what I'm saying is we went around, we talked to fans of Goodwood, people who've never heard of Goodwood, we talked to all the staff, all the board, all the money, we got all these insights. It's like putting it all into a pot, and you distill it down to say, what are the common things that are consistent about all of these aspects of the business that make it, how can we come up with an overarching proposition which embodies everything that happens at this place. And actually it's an exercise I really like doing. You can sort of do it yourself with a bit of thought, and sometimes I do it myself, and you just do a sort of, just write down all the things that you think are relevant to what you do, and then you go and then distill it down into 3, because you might just come up with 3 words. It doesn't have to be a sentence, it might just be 3 things, because quite often a proposition is usually always underpinned with a value set, and that value set tends to come from, if it's your business, yourself. So your values, for example, might be, one of my big values is to be authentic. So authenticity would always be a massively important value to me in anything I did. And I think increasingly in the world we live in today, authenticity has become a very powerful value across lots of businesses, because nobody likes to be with an inauthentic brand, because an inauthentic brand is one, for example, that says it does all this environmental stuff and actually behaves like this over here. Well, that's not being authentic, and the customers are seeing through it these days. So underpinning your proposition will be a set of values that inform how you behave and how you are as a business. And as I said, they tend to come from the founders and the owners of businesses, but they are driven by the insights and the expectations of the consumer. So when a brand behaves badly, if it's authenticity is one of its values, and when it stops being authentic, well, then you're going to lose your customers. And we have seen that with some businesses over the years when they start behaving badly. So that's why, these days, with all the information available to people, businesses have to be much more careful how they behave. They can't hide it from consumers.
I think what's quite useful is the fact that you can start somewhere with a proposition, but responding to your market, listening to your market, etc., can change that proposition.
Yes.
Because often we start a business and we're quite emotionally attached to what we think it stands for, and how it must look, how it must feel, and all of that stuff. But it's really useful to know that and have the courage to go with the flow and to listen to your audience, whether you're writing a book or selling a product or a service, and adapting and recalibrating. And that's really useful to know.
Well, it is very, very good, because what I always say, my mantra is have a plan can change. So again, rather than beating yourself up with a got a pen and you're sitting there thinking, just write stuff down. Just have a plan, have an idea, and then you can evolve that idea. But what's important is to have something to play with, because you're not going to come up with the perfect proposition or idea. And you might, particularly if you're a writer, have an idea about what you want to write about, a straw man, and just play around with it. And then, it might completely evolve into something else. And equally, if you have a business and you have a product that you think is going to be great, as soon as you start talking to people and people start going, yeah, no, I really like it, but I don't see why you've got that packaging on it, or why would you be doing it like that? You think, oh no, and you've come so wedded to it, you can't see it, you see. So you very much have to be open to customer feedback or insights or what the market wants, because it's absolutely no good presenting something, writing something, making something that isn't what consumers want. It's just what you like to make. That's not, if you're in the business of growing a business or just establishing a business, that's not going to work. And consumers are very educated, informed people now, and they can tell you so much. I mean, when I launched my aromatherapy business, we went to a Christmas fair. Well, we learned more in one afternoon than we had for the whole year sitting in our office. You know, by the you put the product in front of people and they sniff it, and that then you know what's going to work, what's not going to work in 5 minutes. So that's how that sort of goes.
So Jackie, what do you do to distill all your thoughts and ideas down to get down to this proposition? Because, you know, it's great having all the ideas and being expansive and listening to your audience and blah, blah, blah. Is there a process you adopt that just kind of helps people to distill?
Yeah, well, I suppose my own process is just to write it down. So let's say, what am I going to do? Let me think about what I'm going to do. I'm going to make some trainers. I'm going to make some trainers from recycled tires. So so the thing is, I've got these so what I've got is I've got this recycled tire stuff, and I'm thinking, oh, I could make trainers out of that. That could be a product the customer, you know, that might be good in the market. So I'd just write it down, and then think about why it's a good idea. So I'm going to go, well, I've got this recycled rubber. What are the properties of the recycled rubber? It's very flexible. It's very cheap. It's recycled. So I start to write all those properties, all those values down, and then think about it. Well, is it going to be a fashion product, or is it going to be a product like Crocs or Birkenstocks, which actually don't start out as fashion products, but they become fashion products? So maybe I could start to say, right, okay, it's going to be like a Croc. So it's Crocs meet Birkenstocks recycled. So I start to sort of think about, right, okay, I'm thinking about, you know, because I don't think it's going to be a particularly pretty item, but people are going to love it because it's made out of tires. Because I remember the first time I saw somebody wearing like a Croc, I just thought they sort of weren't well, you know. But then when they wear them, and then you see more people wearing them, you think, oh, that's fine, you know, because Hush Puppies back in the day, which were, you know, the original desert boot, were made for walking in the desert. I mean, they were not cool, and somehow they became cool at some point because somebody made them cool, and then they become a fashion item, but they didn't start out as a fashion item. Same with Dr. Martens, etc. So, you know, Dr. Martens is a work boot, and that's a fashion statement. So I would start, so I don't know if that makes sense to people, start to think about what's the thing that you've got. So if you're writing, I don't know, a guidebook to divorce, I know you could write that book, Beverly.
Twice over, probably.
I know a few people who not to get together and write that book, but the guidebook to divorce, you say, okay, so it's a guidebook to divorce. First of all, of course, have a look around and see what other guidebooks there are. What's the thing that's key in this guidebook? You think, well, the reason I'm writing this, what's driven you to write this book? I'm going to write this book because it needs to be quick and simple, and it needs to cut through all the stuff that happens in divorce. I want to make it like that. So it's going to be a handbook for divorce. So do you see how you start to, does it making sense to anybody? How you just start to think about what you might do, and you just build on it, you know, and just write it down. You know, it's going to be a handbook for getting divorced, and it's going to be short, or it's going to be detailed. You know, what's the style of it going to be? It's going to be bullet pointy with big headings, or is it going to give you a lot of details? It could be a book with lots of stories of other people's stories about how they manage with divorce. Is it going to focus on the emotional aspects or the practical bits? Is it going to be both? See, all of this sort of stuff, and just gather that all around and then start to distill it. And then you might look at it and go, I don't really want to write about the emotional bits because it's too upsetting. I'm just going to make it really practical because the emotional stuff is too hard. It's not my bag. I don't do emotional stuff. So I'm just going to focus on the practical. And then you go, oh, the 24-page guide to a practical divorce. There you go. I've got that. Something like that. And then
and I suppose when you're editing and reviewing, you can say, does it still reflect the
what
proposition?
I set out to do?
Yes,
what I set out to do.
And I suppose that's a good way just to keep yourself true and authentic.
And you go right off. We all go right off, especially me. And so start off with something, and then I go all the way, then I have some more ideas, and I come back and I go, oh, well, that's, no, it doesn't actually, I've gone right off there now. I've gone off at a tangent now, because what you might have is, so if I take my aromatherapy business, So you start off with an aromatherapy business with Home Sense, not Home Sense. And then I end up doing beauty packs for, you know, what they called coffees, little bags for first class passengers on a plane. Oh, well, I've come right, you know, well, what am I doing making bags for first class passengers on planes when I just wanted to do, you know, aromatherapy scents over here for rooms for the home. I should, you know, if I'm going to go start making, you know, first class bags for the planes in BA, then I'm not going to achieve what I set out to do. But that's what we all do, because, oh, I've got this idea and this idea and this idea, but you need to keep to your core idea for your proposition, for your business. We're going slightly off a tangent here, but also what we're talking about here is telling the story of your business so that you can communicate it to your audience. That's the reason we need to keep it on brand. And that's literally what a proposition does. It keeps you on brand. So if you think about Innocent and how they started, well, their story was, does anybody know the Innocent story? Does anybody know the Innocent brand? Yeah. So Innocent brand over here in the UK is juices, and everybody said, smoothies. You know, yeah, smoothies, that's right. So everybody said that was a really bad idea. They ignored all the people. They went to a pop festival, they set up a stall selling smoothies. The queues were really long, and they decided to give it a go. So they gave it a go, and now they're part of Coca-Cola Group, and they're all multimillionaires. And of course, being part of Coca-Cola Group slightly loses its authenticity, doesn't it? Because I don't believe a product is natural if it's part of the Coca-Cola Group, but it's still trying to keep to its core proposition. And you'll notice in all its marketing, it still keeps it simple. It still keeps to its core idea of simplicity and fresh. And we go everywhere in the world to get the best fruit and all that stuff. So they're still keeping that core proposition they set out with at that first pop festival in Hyde Park. It's still there today in their marketing, that story. And so for the believers, that Innocent brand will still maintain its status for their consumers because they've kept it, you know, on brand, literally, to being a very pure, healthy drink.
So when you think of some authors who kind of write epic novels, or they're successful, they've written 5 and 6 success, like the Harry Potter lady, and you know, she's written 7 books, and it's all in the same genre, it's all in the same theme, one building on top of the other. Staying on brand must be hugely intense and challenging.
Yes, well, you see, that's why they come up with another name, you know, because she wanted to write a detective novel, so she had to develop a different brand for that, didn't she? Because she can only be J.K. Rowling for Harry Potter, so she'll have to be somebody else for something else, won't she? So so yes, I think I was really shocked about being part of Coca-Cola Group. I think just to be really shocking, I think Pret a Manger is as well, or maybe part of. You'd be amazed when you look behind some of the big brands. Basically, the big brands own most of the universe. So yeah, it's all pretty shocking. I might be slightly wrong, but they're definitely part of a big group. Yeah, but obviously they like to keep that hidden because, you know, it's not authentic, is it?
Yeah.
Yes, so
I mean, we've got lots of small businesses here, and people who are writers as well. Do you want to ask anything? Because we've got literally 4 minutes left, and if Jackie doesn't mind, a few bonus minutes to answer
listen, I'm happy to stay here as long as you like, and I'm very happy for anybody to ask me and say, look, this is my situation, this is what I do, how could I approach my brand or my proposition? You know, I'm quite happy to do a bit of that if you like. I don't mind.
Floor's open, ladies, gents.
Hello, Sophie. Is there Sophie Christie?
Yes, hello. So I was trying to find my unmute button. Yeah, I've got a question. I'll just tell you a little bit. I have a couple of businesses, but one of them is called Mirror Doors Direct, and it sells mirror doors for wardrobes. But it didn't start off like that. It was a business that did all sorts of glass and wood.
Somebody's got music on, so it's I can hear it.
It's me, sorry, it was my yoga music from before. Hang on. I'll go from one thing to the next.
You're too zen, Sophie, too zen.
Right, it's gone now.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I started off with a business that tried to be everything. and there was lots of different colours and styles, profiles, and did interiors. And I spent 80% of my time sort of trying to sort out people what they wanted. And then I started about 10 years ago, and about 4 years ago, I realised that 80% of my sales were mirror doors.
Yeah, there you go.
So I had a new website built, just doing mirror, 4 different coloured frames. That was no other option. And my sales doubled the next year.
Well, that's just a fantastic example, Sophie, of niching down, because I think particularly on the website, on the internet now, you know, if you're looking for a part for your lawnmower that has wooden rollers, there'll be a website out there that just sells parts for wooden lawnmowers, and they'll be absolutely the best in the business. So this whole, you know, the internet is giving us the opportunity for people like yourself to be niche. And I've got a girlfriend who loves mirror wardrobe doors, and I bet she knows you, because that's all she ever does is mirror wardrobe doors in her houses. So, you know, and I as somebody that goes, I just look for things, specific things, you know, like you want mirrored, what you're going to Google, mirrored wardrobe doors, and you come up, bosh, fantastic.
Yeah, so that's worked really well. So for the last 3 years, we've sort of been on page 1 for mirrored doors, and that's great. So now I'm thinking, right, well, what's next? Because what else?
Well, that's really.
You have your bungalows, Sophie, and that is a brand which you're building.
Well, it is, yeah. I've got a self-catering property as well, but
you see, in terms of the mirrored doors, that's a great example to say, okay, so what are the things about these customers for mirrored doors? What else can we sell them? Right, so that's what you do, is think, okay, well, these customers that have gotten their mirrored doors, I mean, my girlfriend is an absolute mirrored person, you know, she loves all this, and there's a certain style to it. So I could tell you, for example, that probably what you could do is sell Victorian, you know, special sorts of taps, because the people that will search for mirrored doors are people who want a very specific thing. So I would find other niche products, like claw handled baths or something, I don't know, claw foot baths or something, because there'll be people who are looking for very specific niche things.
So right, yes, I suppose start something else separate.
Yes, but the thing is, it's looking at that customer and saying, what else does this customer search for? Because that particular customer is somebody who wants a very specific thing. I mean, you know, not everybody would, the mirrored door customer has certain aspects, you know, they're obviously into embellished interiors, right? They don't go for I mean, me, I just whack some paint on a door. I wouldn't dream of putting a mirror on a door. So they obviously like embellished interiors. So what else goes with an embellished interior, for example? I would really explore around that. You're bound to find loads of opportunities around that, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Any authors want to ask Jackie a question? Is that you unmuting, Rachel?
Yeah, I was going to ask what you're saying about that brand. How important? So, do you think it would be sensible for? I mean, we had Jen Moon on a couple of weeks ago, Jackie, and she was very good at saying now that she'd found her niche in vegan food, she wasn't going to go off that niche. She had,
no, right, stick with it, yeah.
Because her idea was, I think, you know, if you buy one Jen Moon book about vegan food, then you'll want to buy the whole range.
Yes.
In a way that, you know, you could say Nigella's never written a novel. She's only ever written cookbooks. How important do you think that is for writers to kind of find a niche and stick with it? And when do you think they should strategically look at changing?
Well, I think when they've run out of ideas or want to do something different. I mean, really, writers do what they do because they hopefully they want to write about certain things, or they've got something they want to communicate. I mean, hopefully, maybe some writers just do it because they've got to earn some money. But, I'm not a writer myself particularly, but I'm sure you can't do it unless you want to do it, or be successful at it unless you've got some good ideas and feel motivated to do it, because it's a hard thing to do, writing. So I think, I haven't mentioned actually raving fans, because really the thing that a brand wants, once you've got this emotional connection, is you want to build not just loyal customers, which is what people used to say, is you want to attract raving fans. And actually, I think you're much better off having 10 raving fans than 100 loyal customers, because a raving fan is a much more precious thing, because they're going to be so loving you and what you do and what you stand for, that they're going to tell other people, and that, you know, you're going to get more out of that audience than you are having lots of more loyal people. How do you get a raving fan? Well, you keep giving them more and more of what they want. You do stuff. So, for example, if you're writing your vegan books and you've got your reviews of your books, you write to them and say, thank you so much for your review. I'm so glad you like that stewed apple pancake thing that I invented, and the people who like that did like this, you know, and start having a dialogue, because what people really want to know is, again, they love the story, the person behind the book, the person, you know, Jamie Oliver, when, you know, when he started out, everybody loved the cheeky chappy image. He talked, you know, he really talked to his audience. He really knew his audience. So I think for writers, it's about really knowing your audience. And with, you know, writers always used to be very distant people to us. And, you know, because you bought this book and there might be a little picture of him, if you were lucky, on the little fly sheet. But now we can know much more about writers because they can be profiled, and we can really, so I think people, if you love a book, I mean, I've just been reading some books about somebody, you know, once I read, and I like the one book, and then I like the next book, and I really want to know a bit more about this author. Where's he come from? Why does he do this? You know, and people really do want to know. So how to get raving fans is to really connect with your audience and give them more and more and more, you know, over deliver, I suppose. And give them more and more and more. But I think for authors, it's easier in a way, because, you know, you can be quite visible on social media. You can tell them about what you're doing, what your next idea is, what the, you know, how you got the idea from the last book or whatever you did. So yeah, they'll love it. People love it. Anybody else got anything they're stuck with or need any help with, or?
There is a book on how to get raving fans.
Yeah.
And Jen, I'll post that when I post the video up. I'll post that as part of the posting on your story for you. But it's a well-known thing, how to get raving fans.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So on that note, it's now 20:04. We've had 4 minutes of bonus time, and I can't tell you, Jackie, that was really, really helpful and insightful. It was interesting to hear what some of the stories were behind the brands, and what that obviously tells us is that we need to get our story right.
Yes,
and
get your story right.
And also not to be afraid to change that as you calibrate and recalibrate to the times, your audience, and as your competitors change, your market changes, etc. Obviously, with authoring, it's slightly different because you got to stick to your genre. It doesn't mean you can't change, but you need to be consistent within the covers, consistent within the covers of the book, and each chapter needs to drive itself.
Yeah.
Okay, on that note, a huge thank you for your time, Jackie, and your insight. Wonderful experience. And yeah, just invaluable. This is a huge boon for your story, and helping us understand how to work with brands, get our propositions, and how to distill down into our niche.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's been fun. It's been nice to meet you. And if anybody wants, wants any help, or a little bit of a chat, or a little bit of a nudge in the right direction, or a little bit of how can I do this, just get in touch. That'd be cool.
Yeah, thank you. But before we go, I just want to say our next golden hour is with Dr. Richard Noor, who's on the call with us. Maybe you'd like to give us a quick wave, Richard. Hello, Richard.
Good evening, guys. Hi.
Hi.
It's a little bit later here, sunny South Africa here.
And Richard will, if there's anything we want to talk about, Richard is a brand in himself with very strong values. And so we'll hear more about it on the 17th of February. Richard's written a book, which I have here on my desk. Just grab it. radical transformation and sustainability, which is a humanitarian approach to manufacture and industry. So yeah, so we look forward to seeing Richard on the 17th. Don't miss out. His story is compelling. There's a wonderful personal story behind him writing this book and building this model. And as you know, South Africa is a melting pot of conflict and transformation. So I bet you, and I've heard some of the story, and it's going to be very interesting. So everyone, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for showing up and staying up late.
Bye, thank you.
And
Bye.
Jackie, and hope everyone got as much out of it as I did.
Oh, whoops, I just stopped the thing. Yeah, thank you. I just dropped the iPad. Yeah, bye, thank you.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.